Welcome to the English Homemaker podcast, a podcast where we discuss all things home, a realistic but fresh view of homemaking from the suburbs of the south of England. I'm your host, Alyssa Evelyn. Welcome to episode 13 of the English Homemaker. Hello everybody, how are you today? I really hope that you are having a great day. I hope you woke up on the right side of bed and you remembered straight off that you are loved, you have everything that you need, and that you're more capable than you can possibly think that you are. And I really, truly actually mean that. I know that sounds really cliche, but I think we all need to remember that every single day. So today I have a real treat for you guys. I was so excited to record with Elisa Rathje and she did not disappoint. This was an amazing conversation and I'm so happy to share it with you. I think it's full of wisdom. Just the way that she communicates and thinks about the world, I think is very unique. And I think it's something that we could all do with hearing more. Even simply in the way that she speaks, she's very considered and thoughtful. And she really is the epitome of slow living, regenerative living, reclaiming, reviving old practices and ways. And permaculture just kind of flows through her. And I just think it's an amazing conversation. If you've never heard of Elisa before, she runs the YouTube channel AppleTurnoverTV. She also has a Patreon and she has a podcast called The Journal of Small Work. And as well as her film offering and her audio offering, she also has letters, blogs, and a book. So do go check her out. You can find everything all over on her website, and I'll make sure that it's linked in the podcast show notes. We start by talking about some of the homes and places that Elisa has chosen to live. And then we go into the nitty-gritty of why. And that's my favourite part of the conversation. Just really drilling into her philosophy, the way that she thinks about the world, and kind of just deep chat about the culture behind it all. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Elisa. So welcome to the podcast, Elisa.
Thank you.
I love you have a very similar name to me. And I think that's kind of actually how we originally connected. I think I probably sent you a message saying, hey, your name's kind of like mine and you're kind of interested in similar things to me.
So you're Alyssa and I'm Elisa.
That's right. Yeah, I've got the double S and the A and you've got one S and an E. Lots of people think mine is spelled with an E. But
is that an English name? Is that an English spelling?
I believe it's the French version because Mum was reading a book with the name that was a French book at the time.
My name, I don't know about the spelling exactly. They were going to have it Elise with an E, which in German and maybe in Finnish, my mother's a Finn, you would pronounce that as an Elisa, Elisa.
Yeah.
But no one would do that here in Canada, ever. It would just be Elise. So they gave me the A, but they named all three of us names that sounded the same in all three languages because they struggled so much. My mother's name is Maria Elena. And in the 50s, in, Winnipeg, you don't say that. It's sad.
Yeah. Well, you do have a beautiful name, if I can say it. So, Elisa, you live on Salt Spring Island, which I'm a bit jealous of, quite frankly. It looks very beautiful. And I love that it's kind of filled with these artists and creatives and future thinkers. I think how amazing. And so I wonder how long you've actually lived there.
It's 7 years now.
Okay.
Yep. So in about 25 years, I'll be considered a local. An old timer. No, 40 maybe. It takes a while. There's people who've been here forever and ever. And I'm definitely new.
Yes. I'm imagining, are they generally accepting in a kind of, you've lived a bit of time in England as well, haven't you? Is it, do you feel there's a similarity in getting to know people and the speed which that happens? Or, is it they put you on the acquaintance list for a while? Or is it you, because you're all on an island, you have to get to know each other quite quickly?
Oh, it's like, because it's so small, there are things you can do here you could never do in a bigger place. So I was on the climate action plan team and I was, working with the transportation team to build that part of the plan. And then I was on the, I can't remember what you call all these things, but I was, yeah, fully participating in this. And I don't have any qualifications to be doing that, just passion. And, you know, I mean, I think it was great that I was there in that there were only two of us who were real passionate cyclists. And so we were giving that end and saying like, hey, we need shared transportation, not the private vehicle. Like the future is not private vehicles. It's going to be shared and we need to move there fast. And we only have bicycles. We got rid of our car 5 years ago. And so that perspective, and also being a mother and running a farm, also without a car. So that perspective, but I would never have had a look in for anything like that. And it happens all the time. If you want to participate in stuff that you would have had to have a degree in or something like that, and this, like they would never consider you. And yeah, so things happen where you're just chatting with someone. It turns out not only are they the bartender, but they're running the film festival. You're like, oh. And so when I lived in London, we lived there for a year and a half, I think, or 2 years. Yeah, a couple of years. And about a year and a half in, our neighbors noticed us. Like they had to really be doused in us. It was like, you know, marketing where it's like you have to see it like 17 times. And whereas when we lived in Sussex, it was really instant, to the point that when we left after 2 years, someone's husband said to me at a going away bash that we threw, you haven't lived here long, how do you know all these people? But I think the countryside often works that way. Like we met a couple of people, and so everyone connects to you, to everybody in this little community. So I do love that. I really do.
How many people do actually live on Salt Spring?
So it fluctuates radically. It's one of these places that there's a lot of folks have places that are their holiday home. And then a lot of people just come here because they love it. And so we expand up to like 20,000 or something in the summers. But I think our resident is holding somewhere around 12,000.
Oh, wow.
So it's not tiny. It's 80 square kilometers. It's probably like putting Sussex on an island. I mean, that's probably what it's like.
Yes.
And then it's so completely different. Like, I mean, obviously it's an island, but we also have a ton of lakes, and then we have mountains. Like proper England doesn't have mountains like this. And so you can't get a proper weather report, a weather forecast, because it depends. Like you could not say what Salt Spring Island is going to be like. They try. And so they said 4 degrees, and I'm looking outside and it is frozen out there. And I know I didn't put the tap on the barn to drip, and I'm terrified because I just replaced that tap. Hopefully it didn't burst. I think I may have a little bit of PTSD around things frozen and bursting because I get really overly wound up about it. But, you know,
I feel that's such is the farmer's life.
I mean, even if you're not farming, just being more responsible for more systems, I think can feel very real. Every now and then, my fantasy when I get overwhelmed, which is usually about September, early September, when the harvests are like just chucking themselves at you, and it is of an apartment without even a house plant.
Okay, so the fantasy works in reverse.
Yeah, it's just like, I know I'm tired when I start thinking, who am I? What am I thinking? Like, I should actually aspire to that life that I think capitalism is driving us towards, where corporations just provide all the things and we don't make anything. And so you can't mess up. All you have to do is have money, which is harder and harder as well. But like, at least there's no responsibilities. And then I come back to my senses.
So what made you move there? Is that a life that you've always lived? Is it something that you were inspired? Like you said, you were in London and then you were in Sussex. Did it start there? Where did you always have a farm? Is this your first farm?
I grew up in suburbia, but it was like hippie. It started off very hippie. Well, I shouldn't say that. This was mill workers and it's First Nations territory on the North Shore of Vancouver. So very, very beautiful and actually tiny as well when I was there as a child. So like our high school had 300 people in it. It was pretty small, but nothing was being produced there. So it was suburbia.
Okay. Yes.
Right. Like that's how I would define it. You're not making anything that
everything
you're
comes
leaving.
in. Yeah, sure.
But, you know, really strongly, quote unquote, natural, right? Like the bears are coming and walking through the schoolyard and everyone has to stay in. And the principal had to eventually get you to, well, we would just say we couldn't hear the buzzer because we'd gone so far off in the woods and we could have gone for miles and miles and miles and miles. Which we did sometimes. It was wonderful. So I didn't even have a thought of anything like a farm. But when we lived in a flat on Main Street in Vancouver, and I know I wanted to grow more, and we were looking for more like space. But even then, Vancouver was insane to try to buy. And we were already homeschooling our kids. And I think there's something about that whole constellation of activity. Like if you've worked with a midwife, say, or you wanted a home birth and then like breastfeeding, extended breastfeeding. It's like that world of attachment parenting. Really, it's like a waterfall of other possibilities that I believe are completely and totally related.
Yes.
And they are all about connection, and they are all about reclaiming and bringing home into your own hands some aspect of your life. And so taking it back into your own hands to homeschool or something like that, some variety like that, just sort of followed for us. And so I think taking our food back became a concern. And then when we were living in London, and I did have a little garden there, very shaded, but anyway, I did crazy stuff for a renter, like totally renovated the garden and made it gorgeous and full of food. And
were they happy at the end of your stay?
Oh, I think they were very happy. Yeah.
Okay,
I'm like, I'll just move this shed over so there's more garden here. Okay, great. Install a rain barrel. So, but we started watching River Cottage, like the early days of River Cottage, and Alys Fowler and her lovely edible garden that's just timeless.
I will get the first time I saw her garden because I'd never seen a garden like that with everything all together like that in that wild way that somehow also just looked so beautiful and seemed so sensible. Never forget that.
I know, polyculture. And so I think there was just a lot there that just grabbed us. And we were talking about this a lot. And it just seemed like a lot of energy was pushing us in that direction. And I had a friend over here who said, you know, you talk about this stuff. I read Animal Vegetable Miracle. That was like, blew my mind open at the time, Barbara Kingsolver. And she said, you know, why don't you just move to the countryside when you're back in England? And I was like, well, you can't just do that. Like there are very, you know, you don't want to end up in a place that's like super ultra right wing. Like there can be trouble. Like you don't just pick it off a map. I wouldn't know how to choose. And she said, well, I know somebody in Oxford. I'll ask her. And so they had an idea. They said Forest Row. And so I stalked Forest Row because even at that time, like 12 years ago, everybody had everything online and you could see like they have biodynamic colleges, never mind farms, and they have a Waldorf high school, like Waldorf. And so if you end up there and you don't like school, you homeschool, you unschool, really. And so even though it was the bittiest place, is like overrun with, at the time, it was overrun with unschoolers. Anyway, so we decided to go down and meet her friend. And I think my memory is not the best one, but you know, I think it coincided with a village festival. Or we came back for that. And they watched Buster Keaton in the hall, like 200 people laughing. And my heart just did something. And then they had, maybe it was the following weekend, they had, like a contra dance, huge in the barn with local food and live music and all ages dancing together in this huge circle. I mean, I was like so completely in love. And I had already started writing when I got to England, right? Because I trained as an artist and I never chose a medium because I always like to just use whatever the idea really demands. And so I would just learn what I needed to learn. I'd learn to build a kite or make postage stamps or whatever it was. And so that kind of like, it was like England just, yeah, it really, really drew that out. And so I was writing about traditional skills and then moving to the country, and that was very rich. Yeah, so we lived there and we were in a 400-year-old cottage, which, the first thing that happened is the pipes burst and it snowed really hard and like a cliff came down, and we didn't have any food. So we had to go to the local pub, which was incredible food, like unbelievable food. We were right beside Gravetye Manor, which now I'm like, why didn't I go to your kitchen garden? I may have to somehow go to England. I don't want to really fly anywhere, but I really do miss it. I do miss it. But I was also like paralytically homesick at the same time. I'm basically cursed now, having lived there. Like, I love you. I miss you. No, I can't leave.
But it sounds very much like you've brought a lot of what you learnt there with you to your new destination.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah. And so there's so much resonance. Yeah, and a lot of elders just thrilled to teach you, thrilled that the kids were into all of this as well, right? So I was writing about things I was doing, but I was also like, it was completely embedded in what my children wanted to learn, and also like very seriously learning to produce more of what we use and eat. And yeah.
So it would be really interesting, I think, because I know the answer to some of these things, but what do you produce yourself?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say, look at the last year,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps.
Yeah, look at the last year because it does change over time. And I have seasons of like, I'm going to go and make all of our crockery. And then I haven't been up there for 3 years. So right now we're on an acre and a half. It was originally apple orchard, originally. In the Victorian era, it was apple orchard. It's always been a kind of a crossover point for a lot of First Nations peoples. And so different people use it, especially on the way to the mainland between the large island. So the settlers were, yeah, they put it in an apple orchard. And then 1960s, this became a little homestead. And so there's a ton of fruit. Everybody who's lived here since then has added more food, and we came with plants and added more and continue to add more. So there's a lot of different nuts growing here. There's tons of apples still, pears, plums, cherries, all of that, like you name it. And then we do have a pair of goats who are incredibly functional within the system in so many ways. And one of them is dairy, but I have taken some time off of that because I'm also in that moment where I'm needed by the young adults in ways that you don't really anticipate when you're like, little ones are going to grow up. And then so I'm kind of needed on that side, but I'm also needed by elders, the ailing elders. So to milk, basically I could do it if I organized more of a collective so someone else could step in, but that is probably one of the hardest parts of living in this era of individualism, is like asking for help just feels really hard. Integrating other humans into your family system, set up something of some kind of exchange. Actually, that's the hard bit. Like getting the goats, that's easy. And chickens and ducks and geese, and a very important cat. And then, we're doing things like, I'm not growing the grain, although I have a friend who just grew some. And I was telling your brother, who does such amazing things, that we were invited to somehow participate next year when he grows grain again.
Amazing.
Because I would just love that. We have a mill. So I have a little film called Bicycle Mill.
Love that film. I think that was one of the first ones I watched, actually.
Oh, good. And so we do have this tiny little kid's bicycle in our kitchen that hooks up to the mill. And so the idea is to be baking all kinds of things. We recently discovered one member of our family's gluten-free. So I have been going back and forth with different grain, but it's complicated. So usually what happens is things work in seasons for me. There is no way I am milling and baking bread in the summer when I'm just trying to keep things watered and, manage the gardens. So I do have kitchen gardens, and I'm my own worst enemy, like everyone in January with their seed catalog is. And I just keep expanding my veg gardens. But yeah, so we, and we have hits and misses like everybody. I think that's just the nature of this stuff. But we really have dialed in our year-round vegetable garden, because really the climate is pretty much identical to yours.
Yes, it does seem.
It was so useful for me because I translated all the knowledge I had, the meager knowledge I had, to England, and then I brought it back again. So there wasn't any huge translation, and so same sort of concerns. And so we've got like all the kale standing and all the roots still in the ground. And amazingly, there is a root cellar here, which is very unusual for the West Coast because it's not really strictly cold enough for a root cellar. You can put roots in it, but you're not going to keep much else very cold. So I do have apples in there, and they're my storers. They're my cider apples. So we'll see how they do. It's not that cold. It would be better for cheese and wine. And I do have my cider in there. So we produce cider most years, and it depends on the crop.
Mm-hmm.
And then I really love to experiment and just learn to make more things. And that's also a rotating characters. I'm pretty much guaranteed to drown a lot of fruit in alcohol because it's dead easy.
Yes.
Chuck it in. And lately I discovered through a couple of wonderful people on Instagram, Zero Waste Chef, and also the Medicine Circle. Okay, so they are incredible. And so both of them were making different things. Medicine Circle was making different salts using herbs. And so she made this basil salt that is like, it's green and it's a staggering, and you've just blitzed all your basil with salt and then laid it out to dry.
Basil, I struggle to grow basil, but maybe the allotment next year has sunshine, and so maybe next year.
Next year's the time. And I did struggle until this year, and then I had a whacking great success with it. And so I usually freeze it in jars because dried basil is like a shadow of itself, but frozen is so easy and you jam so much in. But this salt, and then Zero Waste Chef was like blitzing up dried tomato skins that she'd taken from canning. And I was like, I can't really wait for that, but I'll try it with the salt, and oh my God, it's incredible. Again, I love some preserving. Like I love fermenting because it's fast and you can't go wrong. I do a lot of canning, and I'm going to make a film about my pantry. I have tons of footage, but I haven't done it yet. And I just finished a big film, so I'm just going to take a breath. It's just, I think part of what happens in my life is that I want to do things, as the word simply does not hold it properly, and I'm still searching for a better word, but as immediately as possible, and as much with my own power as possible, and without middle parts that can break and become garbage. So for example, the first thing we did when we got here is we sold the ride-on mower. My neighbor had a scythe, my sister had a scythe, and so I was scything. Now I actually very rarely scythe because the geese are unbelievable mowers. I keep meaning to ask the neighbors, like, do you want them to come around? Because they really are effective. They even go around a lot of plants, although then they worried my lavender to death. So you can't tell. Like they weren't eating it. They were just mucking with it. So right? But then as soon as you do that, are you well? Are you healthy? Are you strong? Do you have time? Or is your grass getting really long and starting to fall over and become very difficult to scythe?
I think things should go seasonally like that. I think especially when you're relearning these skills, I think it does it does go in its seasons, because you get to the end, you think, either I need to learn more here, or I'll pause and I'll go on to something else. And with the seasons outside, we're almost forced to go in line with that. And I think that's okay.
Yeah, we get so excited by winter now. I love winter. I love it. Like I could say I love autumn, but autumn actually is harvest season. Like I never really understood that. Like we just harvested the medlars. We're still picking apples. Like we could still pick apples.
Yes.
They will hold on the trees. And so there's an element of like, oh, don't let the crab apples go over while you're so busy. But winter, we get out our mending first and get that kind of cared for, and then the knitting and the crochet. And what I'm hoping is I can swing back around to my very neglected spinning wheel, because I have wool from a couple of sheep whose name I know.
That's really cool.
It's that local, it's that connected. And I have big plans for this yarn if I can turn it out. But it's just getting back into that rhythm because I'm out of it. And then that's the push. That's always the push, is starting.
Absolutely. I have plans, big plans for a spinning wheel one day. And it's quite a big group nearby where I live, actually, that could teach me. I'm just waiting for that moment where I feel like, now you may start, Alyssa.
Yes.
Moving on to the next thing, because I do so many different things.
I know, and it's really easy to tip the scales and then just not be able to come up with dinner. And I started to think about my life in terms of projects and foundational stuff, and try to make sure I'm hitting the foundational notes first.
Yes.
Or reserving energy for that, because I realized very recently that there's some neurodiversity happening all along here. And I just thought I was an artist and grew up among artists. So I just couldn't even see it. Was swimming so deep in that.
Perhaps there was just space for it, for you to be a little bit different than.
Oh, totally. Being different for me was good.
Yes.
It was good. It was encouraged. There is an element of like, oh, that's neurodiversity when I get completely hyper focused on what I'm doing. And I just thought that's like what an artist does. And it is, and they're probably hand in hand. But also I'm good at making connections. That's kind of my thing. And I do think like what you learn at the spinning wheel translates really well to like the potter's wheel, for example. And what you learn at the potter's wheel translates very well to like being a steady parent to teenagers, right? Like there's always like these kinds of interconnected skills. And when you learn something quickly, it's often because it fits nicely with something else. So I've been learning to swing dance, but I've done yoga since I was pregnant with my first child, and she's like 23 years old. I never did dance, never. But to understand, like, okay, you got to have your core and your frame, okay, and then like this move is like that, and being directed, like, okay, that's actually similar skills, and I can just layer them on top. So not everything is learning from scratch. Bread making and I mean, you shouldn't knead your bread like you handle your clay. You shouldn't. And yet, it does translate nicely.
It's like you were saying at the beginning, that kind of snowball that you learn when you were pregnant and you were doing natural birth, and that kind of breastfeeding into attachment parenting. I think that works in so many of those different things with these kind of skills. And I love how you break it down in a way I've never seen anyone else break it down. And you do pinpoint the details, and you take it slowly in a way that you bring everyone along into something which is
is simple, but actually, if you don't know it, there's all these different bits that need explaining to you. I love how you do that in all your videos. Your latest one, I watched the biochar one, and I was just like, thank the Lord it was that lovely and long, because we needed to hear all that detail, and someone else could have done that in 5 minutes, couldn't they? They could have been like, this is biochar, you burn it, and then, and you know, and here it is at the end, and you put it on your garden. But it needed that level of explanation. It was so interesting, and it was just nice. I felt like I was part of it as well, which is encouraging in itself.
Yes, I know the pacing. I often think, oh gosh, it's way too slow. It's way too slow. And then people come back to me and say, I felt restored by the pace of it. And that's so interesting, because we're like constantly told that our world is so fast, and then we're producing things for people in a fast way because we're being told that people can't pay attention. Like, I don't believe that people can't pay attention. I mean, I just don't see that. I see people paying a lot of attention to lots of things when they want to. I mean, how many series are you going to binge? That's a long period of, like, you might think that's a half-hour show, but you just watch 17 of them. It is attention. It's still attention. So I'm really pleased that you like the films. And I mean, I just could not stay on those images of the fire, because I think that is actually the heart of it. It's like, we want to gaze into that fire. And I could not believe that the sky just decided to mimic the colors in the coals at that moment and reflecting off the water because of what angle. I mean, it was unbelievable, such a gift in that moment. And I think that is part of our transformation that needs to happen. And I think that's part of what you're talking about with homemaking, is actually, it isn't that it's easier, and it isn't always that it saves money, although sometimes it does. And it isn't necessarily that something's better, but it is a shift in our connection, and just like the immediacy of things, so that you've got your hands on it, and you're experiencing it more fully, and the appreciation that comes from that when you're connected. Like, even if you don't bake bread ever again, every loaf of bread that you buy, you're aware.
Yes.
You're aware of it. You understand what's under it. And I think that actually is where I began from. I wanted to know, like, how do you make cheese? So I was at Old Plawhatch Farm in Sussex, and they taught me to make halloumi. I was already making some cheese, like mozzarella. You're pulling it way out. Your arms aren't long enough to pull it. But I just like to see how things are made, and not just see it. I don't want to just watch it. I want to do it.
I think when you have that tangible feeling and touch of something and the creating, you can literally never forget, can you?
Yeah, you can't. And so then your clothing, you realize, like, just how much went into it. Yeah. And then how you care for something when you understand how much went into it is a completely different thing. And it's really difficult. We're talking to each other on these microphones. I don't know what went into that.
Yes.
I don't know where all the different parts came from, and who had to actually dig out of the ground the metals for it, and what the social conditions were for that, and who designed it, and whether they designed this thing so it's going to last forever, or more likely that they want me to buy more microphones from them. It's all complex. And what I find really interesting is how often the thing that you make yourself actually lasts longer, actually has greater, like, not even just that it lasts longer, like, that moment when you've grown a tomato and you realize you've been having like the black and white tomato, and this is the real thing. This is the technicolour tomato. But everything is like that. I made yogurt from my goat's milk. That was the last thing that I made before I dried them off. And I read somewhere once that sometimes we're eating more food than we need because the nutrients aren't there.
My brother says all the time. Yeah. Eat less good quality food.
Yeah. And so we're still searching for something. Well, how often is that true in our lives, that we're actually we're trying to do more of it because it hasn't met the need. So when I go swing dancing and I have danced with all these people, like, I don't care. This is exercise. I'm absolutely like sweating and pink. It's not pretty, but I've experienced things that I can't even account for. And calling something exercise, or like even calling it social time, is just completely underestimating what this is. Like, what does it mean when I'm dancing with a farmer in his 80s, right? And I'm in my late 40s. And then there is a connection there that is not something that you could get from a conversation. The conversation would have its own complexities. So, I think those things are deeply nourishing, basically.
That leads me to a question that my brother has for you, because I asked about, probably 2 hours ago, what question he would ask you. And he said, what was your moment of deepest joy this year?
Yeah, it was absolutely swing dancing. Yeah, because already I just love the music, but I loved the music. I loved that jazz, the old stuff for decades. And I was singing it on my bicycle when I went to art school in Munich. And like, that was pure joy. But I did not know I could dance to it with other people and do it well. And I'll tell you what the joy was. Actually, it's like I learned to follow over the last few years, but I just learned to lead.
Oh.
And there's actually a movement which aligns, I think, philosophically with a lot of what's happening in the world, to just kind of, how every tree is being shaken, like, hang on, like you just see it again and again, and all our conflicts, and people are really shaking the structures we've agreed upon, right? And saying, well, like, should it be like this? What, like, how else could it be? And there's a lot of talking.
Yes.
There's a lot of talking. But I think that along with discussing gender roles and all of that, there's sort of this emerging joy in just being who we are and picking up and dropping roles in a way that's much more fluid. And that's certainly true of my partner and I. Like, if something's broken, like the basement's flooded, or the well has popped and we got to deal with it, that's me. I deal with that. I mean, if the microphone isn't working for the podcast, that's him, but he's not here.
We did it anyway.
He's actually over your end of the world right now. He's English, and he's taking care of his English family right now. So that fluidity is happening in dance. So even though you've got lead and follow, and I think people have to work to not say like the man's role and the woman's role. I'm like, okay, hold on. But they're switching. And I don't know how long people have been switching, but switching is huge. So that means you're dancing the follow and the other person's dancing the lead. And then you swap. Oh. And like, when that works, that's like, oh, wait a minute. And for my brain, like I'm a little bit nervous right now because my mother has dementia and my grandfather, her father, had Parkinson's. And so one of the things that I try to do is just keep learning. And I have to say that full body physical thing of like relating to another human who's not going to dance like anybody else, even though it seems like the same steps, they have their own accent. And then swapping back and forth between, am I leading or am I following, which is a very different thing. It's not like it's mirrored. Like, I'm actually going to initiate this move and I have to understand how it all works. I mean, so it's the sort of thing, when you think that narratives about people being lazier and lazier or having less attention or whatever, those narratives that we have, which I just don't know that they were ever true. I think they might land in the same thing of like, youth these days, they're so, and people have always said that.
I agree. Yeah.
I think doing something difficult well is one of the heights of pleasure, right? When you really get that scythe going and it is just moving and your whole body is moving with it, and like you sharpened it correctly that time, and it's just cutting through and the conditions are beautiful. You got the right morning and it's dewy on the grass and it's still standing up properly so you can really get it. And like, you're not hurting your body. You're centered And so it's effortless and it just becomes joy. To me, that's, yeah. So great question.
Beautiful answer. I even think maybe your swing dancing and your scything might have a lot in common, potentially.
I think they do. I think they do. Yeah, you gotta get yourself grounded and like that. I think that's a whole video waiting to happen, is like how to, for me, I had natural births, but then I had ovarian tumors. And so I've basically had the equivalent of a really hatchet job C-section. Oh, the surgeon was excellent, but you have to do a lot more to get that out. And so I really lost my core connection. And that core connection is like, it's literally the core. I can't go move my orchard ladder that's 12 feet. Never mind climb up and stand on it and keep my balance and be picking or pruning, right? Using a saw up in the air without injuring myself, or stacking the wood, or whatever it is. Like, if you have a physical life and you're going to carry those compost buckets, you need to have a good core.
Yes.
And that's been a learning curve all by itself. And so it made me a better dancer. That I had already been doing Pilates to like, okay, I think I actually have to take this into consciousness daily as a practice. Yeah.
What is it about, I think you use a lot of words to describe what you do, but I think I'd like to use the word regenerative a lot when I'm thinking about you. I think your way of doing things, maybe we'll throw permaculture in there, because I think that definitely informs a lot of the way that you choose to do things. And I just wonder what it is that keeps driving you to make choices in that direction. What is your kind of guiding light to keep you going?
I guess, yeah, something we've been talking about a lot, because the world just seems to be more and more and more intense, and the edges of collapse are very close on so many facets of our world that it can be difficult to sustain hope, or even not even hope, but just to feel like I can have any effect at all, like that I have any power over anything, that I could change any of this, because so much of it is on a scale, or it feels completely out of reach. And so a lot of this, I've heard this from other people, is like their work is for themselves, like it's what they needed. And so the work that I need to do for myself is to keep immersing myself and reminding myself that what I can touch with my own hands is small, but can reverberate out and distribute in ways that I cannot quantify. And so it matters. And it may look like it doesn't matter. May look like it's too small, but I write a lot about the small work, and I have a series of films and a little book, a little podcast that's the Journal of Small Work. And so for me, that is, I guess for me, what I began to understand, and I read a book back in art school that, in like women's studies, that's Feminism and the Mastery of Nature of Plumwood, who actually got into permaculture and as an Australian. I didn't know any of that. I didn't know anything about permaculture. I could have, but I didn't. And she was my first real understanding of starting to break down like what is underlying all of our systems, and this way that we go along these patterns where we create polarization. We say this is nothing like that, and then we hierarchize it, right? Yeah. So we say this is better than that. I am better than you, and all the different ways that we work through those. And so for me, I guess I can see the world through that kind of competitive pattern, that conquering pattern, the one that says, okay, well, it can be really small. It can be, I got the best grade, or it can be, I beat the other team, right? Like there's a lot of othering that happens with this. And I think that's what we're seeing, is we're saying, well, they shouldn't be othered. They shouldn't be othered, and they shouldn't be othered. And this way of being shouldn't be othered. And it is grounded in a competitive pattern. And what I see really working and probably the only reason we still exist even now, is the collaborative pattern. So when you're mothering your children, you're not working from a competitive pattern. You're working from symbiosis. It's got to work for both of you, or you will burn out, or they will not get their needs met. So that it's got to be symbiotic. Of course, it's always in some kind of flux. And it's the same thing, like, how are we growing our food? Well, we're growing it in a conquering pattern. So we're extracting, and we've got values like profit driving it because our economy is based in that pattern. But our economy doesn't have to be based in that pattern. There's really lovely Jennifer Hinton talked to Amanda Scott and to Della Duncan about on podcasts about, and Jason Hickel's book, Less is More. These are talking about different ways to structure our economy. So not that we throw everything, right? Like, you still have what you need, but maybe a lot more of it is shared. Because as soon as you're sharing something, you don't need as much. And like, we understand that, I think, in our families, but or at home, like, yeah, I guess for me, it's always driven by what is the root pattern underneath, and how can I create more of a cooperative, symbiotic, reciprocal pattern just in the tiniest things that I can touch. And for me, like you, I'm very, very, very home-based. Everything I do is at home. Sometimes realize I haven't left for a long time. Another reason to go swing dancing. But I think that actually that is where things grow from anyway. If you try to apply from the top down, even a collaborative pattern, I think it would not work. And David Holmgren, permaculture, talks about testing things. Test them out. See how they work on a small scale before you make the mistakes on a big scale. And so see how they work. And so I'm constantly like, how can I heard you talking about your toaster and like being willing to pay really good money for a toaster just because your values are to not be producing waste and to have something that's repairable and will last a long time, like your lifetime. So what is a lifetime tool? And so if I have to replace something, can I replace it with a lifetime tool, not with something that I'm going to have to replace year upon year upon year and end up spending more money and producing more garbage. Mm-hmm. So I'm often looking to tradition for that. And I'm often looking. And so that there's joy in that. It's like, oh, wait a minute, I could wax some cotton and it would become water resistant. And I don't have to have a plastic shower curtain.
Last year I was looking for a new raincoat and I was like, I wonder if I can not have a plastic one. And I did find I actually don't know if it's locally made, but it's a local company and it is wax cotton because...
Wax canvas, yeah. I know, I've got panniers that are wax canvas and I want to make myself a rain cape. And I've heard, here's a hot tip, don't sew it after you wax it if you're going to use a machine, because you'll wax up your machine. But then same thing, like, wait a minute, you could have a faster sewing machine. I love my old Singer hand crank and my treadle. They don't have all the stitches. They don't do all the things. You gotta spend time, like, okay, managing how it works. But it's going to live forever. It's already like 30 years older than me. 100. It's 100 years, one of them. But also, actually, when it comes down to it, I love hand stitching because it's sociable. And I can hang out with my kids and watch a movie.
I hand stitched a bag once because it was for those exact purposes. Was, well, one, it was going to be more beautiful and more efficient, not time wise, longevity wise, it was going to hold better, but that also I had a tiny baby at the time and I could watch her and stop briefly, and it was way more social thing to do.
Yeah. And so then what is speed? What does speed matter? Like, why am I trying to get faster? That's often the question I'm asking. Why am I trying to do this faster? And it's really been easier for me in a lot of ways because I'm not very skilled. I'm going to say it this way. I have not been particularly skilled at making money. Careers and jobs are not really my forte. Now, I have a little Patreon and it's growing, and folks come because they want to support the films, but they also come and do like a behind the scenes with me. So we go, and the last thing we did is we actually had a question from a patron where she wanted to know how I dress on the farm for this life that's very indoors and outdoors and indoors and outdoors, and like not wanting to heat too much. So we have wood stove heating and very, very minimal otherwise. And so then how do you dress? And one of the ways I dress is I use wool base layers. Well, she is hand stitching her own wool base layers now. Amazing. And she sent me some of the stitches to make a really strong, smooth, comfortable seam along like the side there. It's like super inspirational and feels more doable to me. And so those are the kinds of things that are like, well, does it matter that it's slower if I make this one piece and it lasts me for years and years, instead of this piece that I just bought and now it's already got holes in it and it's gone out of shape and now I have to replace it. So for me, because I never was the money maker. I don't think time is money, because I've just come from art, and you just spend the time that you spend, especially if you're doing it for yourself. And then maybe after the fact, you're like, oh, you want to sponsor it? Hooray. But if you're working to someone else's deadline, no, I do think like stepping away from those, that profit driven is so hard. And I hear it with my kids a lot, is like, oh, I should be more productive. And I love Oliver Burkeman, 4,000 Weeks. He wrote this book, and it's essentially saying all these productivity hacks and techniques and stuff, you can use them. Great, use them. I love them. I do love them. I'm like tracking my habits. I've been tracking making my bed, and I've made my bed every day for 35 days in a row. And so, because I actually thrive off that kind of order, but I'm not good at that kind of order. But he's saying, at the end of the day, you're still going to be responsible for your own life, and the feeling that you can't control it because it's uncontrollable will still be there no matter which productivity hack. So we can use it, just not with the end of, this will now make my life perfect and easy, and I won't have to suffer that feeling of like, oh gosh, like if that tap has burst, I'm going to have to go and figure out what's next, because you always will. And there's always more.
Do you feel like you face those things gracefully and as calmly as you are right now? Or are you prone to panic and anger and other emotions in that situation? Or are you quite considerate?
I would say like my birth year comes through in my personality. I'm year of the rabbit, and like rabbits and cats, they won't show pain and they won't show, right? Like they'll go very still instead. And so I think that is how people perceive me, is very calm, when I can be completely and totally wound up, but I will still be acting in a fairly calm way. I mean, I do. I can really shout and rage with the best of them. But usually in a crisis, my response is to go very, very still and do what needs to be done. But I would say that I stew in advance a lot.
You mean worry about things that might happen?
Yeah. Or worry about, like, worry as I try to solve something. So there's a leak in the studio roof, and I tried a couple of things, and it took me a lot of courage to even go try them. And then I don't think it's fixed it. It's better, but it hasn't fixed it. And I'm like, oh, what do we do now? My father's coming to visit, and he can't often do that. So this is a really huge opportunity, because he's got a real problem-solving mind. He's a mechanical engineer, and he built our house underneath us, which probably formed a lot of my being. It's just watching a house being built, yes. Renovated. Yeah. So I get really excited when I can work with somebody. And I understand now with ADHD that that's also just doubling. Like sometimes that person doesn't need to know anything either, but just being there helps. So my kids and I will often just be like, can you double me on this just so I can face it down, and I can do so much more that way. Mm-hmm. But it is awesome when you've got somebody who actually knows what the hell they're doing. And
maybe it was never broken to begin with, that you felt, because I don't think any of us should feel like we can manage things all by ourselves. I don't think it should be that way. It's just a
absolutely not
society where quite often that's the case, and we're by ourselves doing these things, rather than perhaps you're the one that, you know, maybe that needing to have someone there is a sign that you're
connected,
not been broken.
You're right. You're absolutely right. And I do think that's the conquering pattern again. That's the competitive pattern. It's saying I have to have learned it all and not ask for help and do it all by myself, which is ridiculous. Like we've been talking a lot about co-regulation, and a therapist of mine said everything is co-regulation. There is no self-regulation. We're always it's always in relationship that we're doing this. And so to expect someone to regulate themselves is actually cruel. We need to have, you know, and really be understanding that we can stabilize someone or something else just by growing more grounded and still ourselves, if we have the capacity at that moment. Just being with someone who's like connected to their breath or grounded in the earth is going to help someone else to be more grounded. Well, right there's the small work. There's nothing else you did that day. Maybe your dog helped you get grounded, or your cat, or you helped someone else to get grounded. Like that maybe it's still doing the work, right?
That's really beautiful, and I think very true. You did an essay on enoughness, and that was an incredible message, I think, for my entire audience, because I think that's something that the majority of people listening to this podcast need to hear regularly and need to somehow absorb. So first off, people listening, you should go and listen to that whole essay. It was about 6 minutes. It wasn't hugely long, but it was dense and appropriate, and I feel like you could listen to that. I wondered also, slightly, you speaking to your children, perhaps you notice something, or maybe that's something you've always wanted for them. I think that's something that we all want for our children desperately, but I think it's more and more so, especially with social media, that kind of comparison thing. I certainly feel anytime I turn on social media and look at it, that I am not enough. And you repeated and repeated in that essay that the opposite was true, and that our skills and the weird and wonderful ways that we're made are very important, actually. Which actually I think we talked about a bit today.
I think we have, but I think you've already said it beautifully. Yeah, I do love this idea that you never needed to be fixed. Your education wasn't filling you up like a bucket. You already were. You were born already. Like, you were already.
Yes.
And everyone who has a baby and can see that way, can see like that person was already a person. There wasn't some forming that happened over the next 20 years so much as like influences, but their being was already their being. And you weren't broken, which, you know, is diametrically opposed to a lot of our dominant religion and our dominant economy. That root pattern again is saying you're not good enough. You need to prove yourself. You need to prove that you're the best. You need to beat someone else, sometimes literally beat them, and prove that the way you are is the way. Well, actually, it's such a relief to just say, I'm already enough. And what I'm doing is already enough. I don't need to spend the day accounting and proving my worth, that somehow if I haven't used the day and used my time as if it's something to be used, that I'm wasting time, that I have to have financial value. Like, that's a really difficult one. And like I say, I never had it, so I never lost it, but I still could feel it. I could still feel that, why aren't you earning a paycheck? And then, so this idea that the only people of value are those that are earning paychecks, and the ones that earn the biggest paycheck are the ones who have most value. So therefore, anyone who's doing any service work, any kind of unpaid labor, that it's not valuable. And yet we know that's not true. We know that if you had to pay your mom, gross. Like, what?
Yeah.
I'm the highest paid mom on the block. Like, what the heck would that be? We would understand that as crass. But yet I will spend the day going, well, how much did I accomplish? Did I accomplish enough today?
I've even done that this week. And actually, I did actually have the wherewithal a couple of days to go, do you know, I feel like I haven't done as much as I could have done today. I think there's that delineation there, is you can waste your day watching 17 episodes of binge watching some sort of TV. But maybe that's not a waste if you're doing it.
But maybe that's not a waste. Actually, my partner, he understands film, and he studied filmmaking and film history. And actually, to him, that wouldn't be a waste. Like, he would have been examining this thoroughly. And he often is like, hang on, are you doing a high culture, low culture thing? Where you're saying, if you spent 17, you just binged 17 textbooks, like you just binged 17 discussions of whatever highbrow, right?
Yes.
Suddenly you're more valuable. Why? Why is that more valuable? That's all the polarities happening again.
Yeah.
We do a lot of devaluing and saying, well, that's a waste of your time. I do know when I am in alignment with what I long for and what feels healthy and in some harmony. So I know, like, I've been evicting and then repeatedly needing to re-evict my phone from this room, from the bedroom, to just demand that space again and say, do you know, I don't have a lot of control at the end of the day, and I will end up scrolling. So I need to support myself with some kind of scaffolding in order to do the things that are good for me. And so that's what I think of with Oliver Burkeman and talking about productivity. I do need some scaffolding. I need to have community happening. I need to have a morning ritual where I do some yoga and I write before anyone speaks to me. If I don't have that, I don't feel as good. But maybe feeling good could be our guide, rather than that one that we've all internalized that's like, it's very mean. It's very mean, and it's telling us that we're not good enough. And it is that pattern. So I think confronting that pattern and just like softening it a little bit and saying, well, if I'm already enough and this day is enough, even if what I'm doing doesn't look like achievement and it isn't financially productive or anything, that maybe I'm still okay because I was always okay and it's all right. And tomorrow I can catch up with stuff. I really like Octavia Rahim, her work about rest and saying rest is work. I think that we want to be careful to not say that anything that is of value is work, and I'm doing my inner work and I'm doing my personal work and now I'm working at taking care of my kids. Like, maybe we need to also take the word work out of it completely, because I don't think that it was much of a shift to say that women's work is valuable, or that women should have access to men's work and be able to get paid for it and be paid equally, if you're still saying that the only shift we have to make is to value this group now, and then keep expanding that group, instead of shaking up the whole thing and saying, like, why is anyone working? What is the structure here? What if we all said everyone should just have enough? We should all have enough food because we are being. We're just beings. We should have enough food. Why shouldn't we have enough food? There's enough food being produced right now to feed us all. So
yes, yeah.
it shouldn't be a value like, okay, were you enough? Did you accomplish enough? Are you the right color? Are you in the right place? What do you like? Why would that be true? But we regularly seem to say, well, you don't deserve more education because you have to pay for it. What the hell? Don't we want everyone to learn more?
The word deserve just makes my brain explode. Actually, I just don't like it.
I know, but that's the thing we do to ourselves, and that's why I talk about the small work. Is if you're telling yourself you don't deserve, then you're still working along the conquering model, and you're trying to conquer yourself. And so I agree with you. I think the idea of enoughness is something we have to immerse ourselves in, because we are currently immersed in something that's telling us the reverse and that we're not enough. So every time we can alter, even just for a moment, it matters. It matters.
It does. I think it certainly for sure applies to the homemaker, because I know at the end of every day, it looks the same as it did the previous end of the day. No matter how much work I put in, no matter how many loads of laundry, there's still a pile of laundry to go somewhere. There's still dishes to clean. And actually it repeats so much that it can feel like, clearly I'm not doing this right, or I'm not enough for it. And
Oh yeah. And like, what are the standards and where did those come from?
Yeah.
And why is it that the higher we raise, what kind of help we have? I really, really appreciate my dishwasher. Like, I get rid of a lot of machines, but that's one. And the washer. Okay. But now we just have more clothes. Now we just expect everything to be cleaner and like magazine worthy. Like, what are our expectations? I can tell you that my house just got cleaned, and it hasn't been for months, not thoroughly, not even maybe reasonably, because it's harvest season, and that comes first. And it just needs to. And sometimes what needs to come first is jumping in the lake with your kid, because it's so important to do that. And just like, okay, so the floors are sticky. Like, I get it. I'm not going to use chemicals to make that happen faster. I'm not going to hire someone to make it happen faster. I'm just going to kind of go, yeah, I'd like it if it was cleaner, but I'm not willing to beat myself up as much. And the more I'm willing to just let it be, you know what? Have a little compassion, and maybe the expectations need to drop.
I think absolutely. I think so many people put that sort of like productivity, cleanliness, all these things, obedience maybe. And I think it needs to be compassion and love and joy. And I think somewhere in the midst of that, again, all these things we've been talking about, those things are the things that have been lost, and we need to desperately hold on to and find and create moments for. Just love to see more of that in everybody. Okay, last question, easy question. Your favorite meal of, well, you can choose whether it's breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and what you would eat. Maybe like your last meal. I sort of don't like that way of putting it, but favorite meal. Either that you cook or you'd be served, maybe.
Oh, wow. Yeah, probably my mother's lasagna is like very comforting, and maybe also because she could not possibly make that for me anymore. She doesn't have those capacities anymore, not to be in charge of it anyway. But you know what I would really love is if it's my canned tomatoes from my garden, and if it was freshly milled and homemade pasta with eggs from our chickens. And okay, this is the ultimate. You asked me for the ultimate. This is totally not. Our own garlic and our own any veg you want to add from the garden, but also like cheese, homemade mozzarella from our own goats that have been eating all the blackberry and apple around us. Oh, yep, there, I've got it.
Okay, that sounds amazing. Maybe I will come visit you one day. Actually, that would be fun.
That would be fun. That would be fun.
It has been so good to talk to you. Really appreciate your wisdom and knowledge and the way that you share. how you communicate. I think it's wonderful.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure.
So there you have it. The conversation with Elisa. Wowzers. I was so honoured to have that conversation with her. It really blessed me. It really filled up my soul. And I just felt really positive and peaceful after listening to her talk. And I hope you did too. If you did enjoy this episode, I would love if you would do two things. They're both very simple. One is just subscribe or follow my podcast on whatever app you're listening on. And secondly, I would love if you would share this episode or one of your other favourite episodes with a friend, neighbour, colleague, share it on your Instagram stories, Facebook, wherever. Just sharing this episode really, really helps grow the channel and means I'm able to do future episodes. Thank you so much for listening today. I really hope you have a fabulous rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining me. Catch up soon. Bye.